Hello, welcome back to another edition of Film Bites. I'm Andy the Dad.
And I'm Jack the Love.
And full disclosure, we've got to be honest with you. We're absolutely full of stinking cold whilst we're recording this. So if we don't sound our normal bright and cheerful selves, that's what it is.
I don't know if I sound bright and cheerful anyway, but in this particular moment, I'm probably sounding a little worse.
Yes, we're a bit gravelly, so apologies for that, but we needed to do this podcast because we have seen the wonderful Godzilla Minus One.
And what a joy it was.
Oh, yes.
This movie, it was just everything you wanted a Godzilla movie to be. It harks back to the original 1954 Godzilla, and it just overall makes you feel so many emotions. It's visceral, it is heartbreaking, but it's also just, you're on the edge of your seat at any moment.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, I think when it came out of the cinema, that I really do feel that this does for Godzilla what Train to Busan did for zombies.
You said that as soon as we got up as well, and I thought that's a wonderful way of putting it.
It's just powerful. There's a beautiful bit of storytelling at the beginning. One thing that, because this is Toho, they know what they're doing with their own property. They've got a fraction of the budget of the Hollywood movies.
Yeah.
But you would not know that looking at this film.
I mean, you'll probably have noticed if you've listened to the other podcasts, we talked about these independent movies and say, you know, we've seen these CGI graphics and we're thinking they look better than Marvel at the moment. They look better than DC. Because at the moment, DC and Marvel seem to be rushing things out, whereas the independent movies have been working a long time on these projects and making sure that on such a light budget, it looks at its absolute best.
Godzilla Minus One is a prime example of taking care with your property and putting it out right.
Exactly.
We have the whole premise of the story takes place just shortly after the Second World War, which is the perfect setting for what this story tells.
Yes.
We have different glimpses of Godzilla.
Oh, yes.
Which is so clever.
Yes.
And you don't know necessarily from the off what's going to happen, but all of a sudden, then it starts to evolve.
Yeah.
The story. It's beautifully told in a way that I don't think the other Godzilla movies have been. I mean, they've always had politics and the human tragedy of what happens at the heart of the story.
Yes. This
is the first time I really felt that full connection.
Yes.
I remember saying to you, I watched or have tried to get through Shin Godzilla on a couple of occasions.
Which is a mixed one, yeah.
I get bored with it, and I shouldn't be bored by a Godzilla movie. But this one, it had me from the beginning. It was emotional. You had this character with survivor's guilt for not performing his duty as an officer.
Well, we can say what he was, no?
Well, let the audience decide when they go and see it. I don't want to give too much away because I think that's quite the core to his story throughout the movie.
And it's actually based off of actual people that have done the same.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of culture around the idea of after World War II, if you have done things a certain way, you might be frowned upon. I'll leave it at that. I don't want to say too much in terms of the character because there's a lot of depth. And obviously nowadays, we'll look and say, well, there's nothing wrong with that. Yes, you would try, yes, there was a duty to perform and it wasn't 100% completed. But back then, there's a different culture.
Yes.
It's very much you needed to do your job. And if you didn't do your job, you're an embarrassment.
Yeah.
And that's just, when you see that play out, it's just, already you're on this guy's level of understanding. It's horrible.
Really, really good. It's also confidently told. It's patient in its build-up. And when Godzilla is on the screen, he's terrifying.
I've got to say, I don't know how old I was when I first saw Godzilla in the cinema. It was originally the American version it was 2014.
Yeah, the Gareth Edwards.
The Gareth Edwards one. And I think that went back to the inspirational point of making Godzilla dark again.
Yeah.
And I've got to say, I must have been like, oh my God, I was in awe at the time as well. And, I've always thought since then, I've not really been at awe of Godzilla. And, it's such a shame because the 2014 one, I probably was the last time I was in awe of Godzilla. recently.
Yeah.
So when I saw this Godzilla adaptation, there is multiple scenes where my jaw actually was open.
Yeah.
Because he's a spectacle, he's a menace, but he's also terrifying. But it's not just Godzilla that makes me have my jaw to the ground, it's also I'm actually caring for the humans, which is something that I've had issues with in multiple Godzilla movies.
Absolutely. I think that you've really hit the nail on the head there. The thing with the 2014 one is that I really loved the CGI and I loved some of the elements of the storytelling, but I really felt that you couldn't warm to some of the script.
No.
The actors were... I mean, they'd both previously been in a Marvel movie together.
Yes, so it was a little bit awkward, but it was also quite amusing. But you knew who they were.
Yeah, and I really don't think that helped. I felt quite detached from the human story in that film, but the special effects were wonderful. I mean, we've talked about Gareth Edwards this year with The Creator and what he can do visually. It's absolutely stunning, especially on the budgets he works with. But this is another level. I mean, it's the Godzilla that you kind of remember. I mean, the eyes are definitely the old Godzilla.
Those cold, staring eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's the way he moves, he's stealthy, the whole... So he looks like in places when he evolves, that he's in pain as a result of the evolution.
Yes.
And that genuinely you don't think that man can survive what he's going to do.
Yes, I won't spoil the scene, but there is one in particular that does take place. Of course, because it has to in every Godzilla movie in the city.
Yeah.
And there is just such a moment where I think everyone in the cinema was just a bit like, I didn't hear popcorn eating, I didn't hear drink slurps, I actually was hearing nothing at points in this movie where there was just something standing out.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's moments where you're on a lower camera angle, so you're almost like from a ground level view, an ant's eye, if you will, whereas you're looking up at this spectacle. It's a complete monster who is towering over everyone. And it's just, you're looking at the perspective of there is no emotion to this thing. It is just destroyed everyone's lives. And how it plays out, you just don't go, oh my God. And of course, you have to have the iconic theme, which isn't used a lot.
No.
And when it is, I had chills, my hairs were standing up. It was like, oh, this is horrific. It was just, I was so in the moment of the scene. I completely was encapsulated with everything that was happening to me. And again, even in those scenes with what's happening, it's so visceral, it's so dark, and it's so pure at the same time.
Yeah, it punctuates the action that's going on screen really well.
Yeah.
And, I mean, we're all familiar with the kind of stompy moments that we get from Godzilla, but he is terrifying in this one.
And you feel the stomps.
Yeah.
You actually feel like there's going to be a rumble at some point as well. It's that level of realism that I really, really appreciated with this.
Something you touched upon there actually was quite special in the cinema, in that because it was a subtitled movie,
yes,
you were drawn in with the story via the subtitles.
Yeah.
There's a very lovely plot that goes prior to all the main action. But when it went silent in the cinema, it was deathly silent.
Yes, there was one particular scene where, I won't say what it is, but it does happen at some point. It goes completely silent. There's no noise, there's no echoing, there's nothing. It is literally just pure, pure silence. And with this pure silence, I didn't hear a thing. You could actually hear in the room everyone anticipating what's happening next.
Yeah.
I mean, there was an idea, but it wasn't 100%. You were very concerned.
Yeah.
You felt for the humans. You felt for everyone.
Yeah.
It was a moment where you just thought, I don't know what's going to happen here.
Yeah.
Edge of the seat moment. It was so good.
A stunning piece of direction. And again, it just has all the right ingredients.
Yeah.
And I don't think that there could be this level of filmmaking, storytelling, acting, and script. I'm blown away by it.
And I've got to say, 34th Godzilla movie at this point?
Yeah.
Something along those lines?
Yeah.
And I've got to say, I think this is the best Godzilla movie we have seen in a long time.
I'm going to say it's the best Godzilla movie ever.
Yeah.
I grew up with the first few Godzillas, but they were very strangely dubbed.
Yes.
There were the American interpretations of it, so it was a little bit towards the silly.
Yes.
And obviously, you got your guy in a suit. Now, we know that this is a mocap suit, but at no point does it feel like you've got
No.
a bloke walking through, a small scene.
It actually feels like a monster walking. That was the mind-blowing factor. It just makes you realise they really went back to the basics to make it work again.
Yeah.
And you know what? It just gives you that level of appreciation of the art form that was made here. The storytelling, I won't say exactly how, I'll tell you afterwards as well, because I didn't actually say that in the cinema. There's a full circle moment.
Yeah.
Not just in the actions that happen, but also in the shots that occur, a close-up of a certain sequence.
Okay.
And I really enjoyed stuff like that, because it's basically the idea that if a mission's not done, it needs to be completed.
Yes.
And that is everyone's kind of thought process in this movie. And even with Godzilla, I think there's even moments where there's not really much of a face change, but you can still feel a sense of tension and emotion within the beast, if that makes sense, which is really clever. It's like Darth Vader's mask, if that makes sense. You don't see anything. It's a cold mask. It's blank.
Yeah.
But for some reason, you can pick up things with the way in which it's shot at certain moments.
Yeah. And the thing that they've not got to do now is that they've set a precedent for how you can do this type of film.
Yes.
In this genre. What they've not got to do is go into sequelitis
Yeah.
and start going, right, we need this character or that character to go up against him.
We don't need Mothra, we don't need King Ghidorah, anything of the sort.
We don't. Or Kong, which we're getting in. I mean, let's be honest, we've seen the trailer for
Godzilla and Kong, or the way I like to call it, Godzilla X Kong Give It To You.
Yeah.
Which I just think, first of all, the title looks meh.
Yeah.
And in the trailer, what? I think it's actually baiting people to believe that Godzilla's in the movie for a long time. I think it's just a Kong-focused movie.
Yeah.
I think they're actually harking back to the movie in which, and I can't remember the Godzilla's son's name, but there was a whole movie with Godzilla and the son, his own son, and I reckon they're going to go down that story path.
Well, in the cartoon that used to be about it was Gadzuki.
Well, there you go, Godzilla and Gadzuki, which I hate.
The cartoon was just terrible, but really very much of its time.
And I have a feeling we're going to have a similar thing with, this is basically Kong's Gadzuki, but this time it's probably going to be a bit more serious, and this is probably going to be like the Son of Kong storyline.
I just don't want to see it, if I'm honest with you. I couldn't be more uninspired by a trailer than I was by that one.
Can I be honest? I think they saw the response to Godzilla versus Kong,
Which was a riot.
which was, you know what, it was fun. And I think if you're wanting a pure Godzilla movie, that's not the movie. It's just, it's one of those kaiju battles that is fun. It's wonderfully stupid,
Yeah.
but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, you can suspend your disbelief long enough to just enjoy.
Yeah, exactly. You're basically watching Titans destroy Tokyo in basically a massive wrestling ring, and it's just fun. Whereas Minus One is pure emotion. It has heart. It is soul, and it is cinema. It is just, I know that line of "it's cinema" with the Martin Scorsese meme. That's basically how I feel about it. It's genuinely, it's cinema.
So Godzilla Minus One, for me, I mean, it's already on an extremely limited run, which is so shocking. I mean, I think from what I saw in numbers, it's made about 60 million on a 10 to 15 million budget, which is phenomenal for a Toho movie.
Extraordinary, yeah.
If they'd given it a proper release, I could quite happily have seen this somewhere up in the kind of numbers that we're seeing from Five Nights at Freddy's.
I agree. I think what's such a shame is the placement of the movie's time. I understand it's December, but you've got movies like Wonka, which we'll have to get round to at some point.
Yeah.
Aquaman, we'll see how that goes. We've got, what else is there? I've got to be honest, I've already forgotten. Wish is out as well at the moment, which is doing relatively well. But I've got to say that in comparison to all of the movies, I think Wonka's probably the most special out of all of them if you were looking at a big blockbuster. But I think Godzilla is the one there that's the hidden gem, because it's actually what you want from a cinematic release.
Yeah.
I just think timeline placement, it's such a shame.
I just think they didn't have enough faith in it on distribution.
Yeah.
And they really should have picked it up and given it an awful lot more service than they have done.
Exactly that. It's just so special.
Well, that brings us on to what we should be doing on the next podcast.
Indeed.
So we're going to try and have a look at our top 5 movies that we think you should watch, our top 5 movies of the year. So if you've staggered through with our husky tones on this podcast, thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed what we're doing, could you please drop either a like or a subscribe or a comment just to say what your thoughts were to Godzilla Minus One? We loved it. Did you? Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.